Okay, today we're going to talk about um, human relationships and also confidentiality and how those things come into play when working with clients. So, the first thing that's brought up in the ethics code regarding how you relate to clients is sexual harassment. I think in the last few years, with the Me Too movement and things like that, I think as a society, we are a lot more aware of how some actions can be interpreted as, being hostile or harassing. And definitely in a clinical counselor setting, it's really important that you have clear boundaries, both with your verbal and nonverbal behavior. I don't really touch clients. I'm not a hugger or any of that. I just think it leaves, it just if if you can have strong boundaries, you're just protecting yourself. One thing that comes up a lot in working with children is the general rule of thumb, I think, as a society, is to not be alone in a closed room with a child. However, as a clinician, that is really your only option. You're not going to be able to do therapy with an adolescent with the door open. And so it's just really important that you do the best that you can to have very clear expectations and boundaries about touch and about how you talk to your clients. And also with your colleagues, that we are just very sensitive to how people can interpret actions. Not everyone is coming into interactions with a clean slate as far as previous trauma and things like that. And so it's just really important to keep those things in mind. Also, definitely in light of kind of things that our country is dealing with right now, it's very appropriate to be talking about discrimination. I think that in most cases, in therapy settings, it's the most common type of discrimination most likely has to do with financial um, difficulties. It's hard to take on a client that you suspect won't be able to pay you, and so that is something that we will talk about quite a bit when we talk about fee setting and things like that. But you also should not be discriminating based on the more typical things like age, culture, ethnicity, religion, gender, sexual orientation, all of those things. Now, I will say when we talked about competence, just because you aren't competent to deal with a certain type of client does not mean that you are discriminating against them. It's actually in their best interest for them to find someone who can, best meet their needs, and that may not be you. So if you don't have any, okay, myself, I don't have any experience with couples therapy. And so if a couple came to me wanting therapy, whether they were heterosexual or homosexual, I would not be the best person for them. And that's not discriminatory. If they came to me as a homosexual couple, I would not say, well, I can't see you because I'm not comfortable with your homosexuality. It's I'm not comfortable with the couple aspect. Okay, hopefully we are doing okay as far as continuing to record. I had some technical issues there for a second. Okay. Um, Equally important in general is just to avoid harm. The Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm, applies to us as well. We don't take the oath in a public way like doctors do, but um, it's very important to think about how to minimize potential harm and to think about things. There are some types of harm that are unavoidable. You're going to make people upset, likely in therapy. Sometimes that's important from a healing perspective, but you want to minimize that as much as you can. And also just be aware of how you impose your own values and beliefs that can be harmful. Um, you're not supposed to just be a robot, right? I mean, you obviously have insight, or you wouldn't be a counselor. But that's different than making the client feel like they aren't good enough or you are judging them. Carl Rogers talked about unconditional positive regard. You will not like your clients equally. There will be some clients who are very difficult and some that maybe you would like to get a beer with if it was another world, another lifetime. But you will need to treat them equitably as far as treating them with very positive regard. making them feel accepted. And it's not your job to change their mind or to morph them into your own belief system. Now, we've touched on multiple relationships before. For those of you who live in more rural communities, this is a really difficult um, concept to make very black and white, because you will likely have multiple relationships with your clients. Like, they are your client and you also go to church together, or they are your client and your kids played baseball together, or they are your client and your cousin dated their brother, right? Or something. And that's okay. When it's not okay is when you cannot see the client objectively because of the other way you know them. So maybe it's not appropriate if they're in your small group at church and you've already shared intimate, thoughts and feelings with them in, like at someone's home in a group of 6. That probably is not appropriate because you already know things going into that relationship as a therapist. However, if they go to your church and your church has 500 people on a Sunday and it's a, kind of an acquaintance, hi, bye, how are you doing? How are the kids? Type thing, that's okay because you don't have, more intimate knowledge of them going in. Um, so that's really on you to make sure that you are going in with a somewhat open, objective view, and you should not be doing therapy with relatives or with people that you've had romantic relationships with. Those kinds of relationships are considered what's called exploitative, if I can talk. Um, so you cannot ever do therapy with someone you've had a romantic relationship with, ever. It's not appropriate. It skews your view no matter what. Um, that's just how it is. You cannot have sex or romantic relationships with current clients. Now, if you've been in a therapeutic relationship with someone and 5 years down the road or 7 years down the road, depending on which ethics code you're doing, um, you decide you want to date, technically that uh, is allowed. However, I would strongly encourage you not to do that. Um, yeah. Now, maybe if it's a situation where they came in for an intake, you realized I'm not a good fit for you, let's find someone else for you. Maybe you only had 1 or 2 sessions with them, and then 10 years later you see them at the store and you kind of reconnect. That's a little bit different than you saw them for years, weekly, you know all their deep dark secrets, and then 5 years to the day later you make a plan to meet up. I mean, it's just hard for that not to be icky. We'll spend some time at the end of the semester talking about social media and how those things play into therapy, but I would recommend not being friends on social media with your clients unless you have a separate page just for your business, because you will have things on that page that will influence how the client sees you. And you want to go into the relationship just being a therapist, right? If you decide to disclose to your clients that you are a mother or a father, or that you've had a similar experience to what they're sharing with your siblings or something, that's okay. But you don't want them to find that out on their own by cyber stalking you. And also, in general, a lot of the clients that you're seeing are not at their best, perhaps from a mental health perspective, or they wouldn't be in therapy. And you don't want unstable people having access to intimate, details about your life. So it's important in our field that you have cooperation with other professionals. So this might be within your agency, other counselors and social workers and things like that. It also might be more of other professionals in the community. So, for example, there's a few pediatricians here in town where I live that refer to me often. And there's an ABA therapist that I refer to often, and she refers back to me when the kids need an updated evaluation. So, those are professionals, and working together is really important. You definitely would only do that with consent, of course, release of records. I wouldn't call up pediatricians to discuss clients without the client's permission, but um, it's just important to kind of surround the the client with as much support as you can. We call them kind of wraparound services, and that's to the client's best interest, as long as you're not going into it from a kind of gossipy perspective. So informed consent is one of the best protections that you have as a counselor. It's giving clients enough information so that they can make a good decision about being in a therapeutic relationship with you. Um, you want them to have all the facts up front and to sign that, so that if anything comes up later, you can say, well, you signed this, you had access to this, and you signed it. Things like fees and scheduling and what the goals are. For Medicaid, for example, you sign off on treatment plans. The client signs off too, so that you're on the same page about how you're moving forward as far as what your goals are for treatment and things like that. You need to inform your clients about what the risks are, the benefits are, the type of therapy that you're choosing. Uh, Also, what your qualifications are. If you have a master's and they keep calling you doctor, you need to correct them on that. Your informed consent should indicate if you are currently under supervision and who your supervisor is, so that they can contact them if they need to. And then anything that you're going to later kind of stick them with as far as billing, like if they don't show, is there a fee? Can you stop seeing them for non-payment? Those things need to be in your informed consent. It's essentially a contract. When we talk about consent, it's important to discuss who can give consent. Um, you need to discuss with them that there are situations in which you will break confidentiality, and we'll talk about that with the next PowerPoint. But this is especially important with mandated services like court ordered services. And you would need to explain to them during consent that anything you tell me, I may have to tell the judge, right? This is not going to be confidential, strictly speaking. Also, you need to discuss in that case what will happen if they refuse. So if they have court ordered therapy and they refuse to come, you need to tell them up front, I will have to tell the judge that you are, refusing to attend. In general, informed consent protects you and it protects the client, and it may protect against non-payment, if you have that in your informed consent document. Also, just to touch base on who can give consent. So minors cannot give consent. They can give assent, ASSENT. If they are over 14, they can still sign. Their parent would also need to sign. But they can sign that they understand what you're saying and that they are willingly entering into a therapeutic relationship with you. Other than that, it needs to be an adult. If you suspect that the adult is not competent to understand what you're saying, then you need to follow that up. If they are, for example, in some type of supported living situation, then they would have a guardian. So there are other aspects, but yeah, you need to make sure that you cover yourself as far as if the person is not of sound mind to give consent. If there is an interruption of services, such as maternity leave, COVID quarantine, those types of things, then it is usually the therapist's job to find a way to bridge those services, either with someone else or to just be upfront with the client. Hey, I'm going to be out for 5 weeks, 6 weeks, or a month, or whatever, and let them choose. Do you want to continue therapy with someone else, or do you want to wait for me? If they choose to go with someone else, they're probably not going to come back to you. You don't want someone just kind of floating back and forth between multiple therapists. So, unless there's a really strong reason, I would say if they decide, you're going to be out for 2 months, they decide to go see another therapist. If they've had 8 sessions with someone else, they should probably continue with that someone else, unless there's a really good reason not to. Okay.